Okay. Hi everyone, it's me, Kweeni, aka the Kweeni Wata, and welcome to my channel. This is going to be the second reading of the Sybils, the first prophetesses of Mami Wata. So if you want to watch, if you want to catch up, I put the link to the last reading in the description box. I'm gonna wait for some people to come in and get the notification. Charcoal popping. I need another box of incense. If you guys aren't already, follow me on Threads if you're active on Instagram. It's at Kweeni. I put the information down in the description box as well. All of my links are going to be down in the description box. Hi to whoever. Hi, my precious piece. How are you? What did you say? Hold on. I'm going to read the comment in a minute. Let me see. I started listening to the Sybil oracles, the audio last night, and it sounds so much like the Old Testament. And I was doing some research trying to find where I could get the texts, and there's a lot of different authors that have translated the text, but a lot of people call them the pseudo-sublime oracles because so much was changed. And like we were talking about in the last reading, in the last video, the Sybil's work was destroyed. Like, it got burned. A lot of their work got burned. I'm of the belief that a lot more of their work is somewhere stored in these museums or the Vatican, all of those places. But basically, if I wanted to order the Sybil oracles, it's not authentic. But that's how I feel about the Bible. That's how I feel about the Torah. That's how I feel about all the holy books. We're getting glimpses of the intent of our mothers, but at the same time, it's been distorted. So you really have to use your discernment. Ooh, I did not mean to post that. Without adding something. Let's see. Edit. Copy. Can I bring my lighter in there too? Gotta have another one. Alright. I'm gonna go ahead and get started. This is your first time viewing, I encourage everybody to take notes and also pick up where we left off. Let me make sure y'all can hear me because I have the air on in this room. I think I got the word out. I guess I can put this on Instagram too. I'm trying to make this as easy as possible for everybody to know that I'm on here, because I'm on social media, but I'm not on social media, you know? Let's see. Okay, now I can see y'all in the chat. Hi, my precious piece. He said, oh my, from the last time you were live, so much has been revealed. I'm trying to it's so much to process, and to think we have just gotten into the first few pages. I'm grateful for your time. I'm grateful that you're here. I love your pick a card readings. Thank you, Bonita's Fake Tarot. Trying to clean up my Facebook. Girl, I've been let go of Facebook. I only get on Facebook to check Marketplace. I get on Facebook when I want to buy something. That's about it. Alright. So, let's finish reading. Oh, I didn't like the frankincense. I did want to light some frankincense. To get the vibe. You guys can also join my Patreon and browse the resources that are there. I'm pretty much documenting my evolution as far as conjure and metaphysics and all of that stuff. So pretty much everything that I'm learning and I know is tested and true, I'm putting in the Patreon. The Patreon is a women's only Patreon. So check it out. Now we got our frankincense. I got my tea. I got my incense. I got my white candle. Because I have to ground myself. I have to ground myself in all of this. All right. The Sybil is the first prophetess of Mami Wata. This is page 12. In 1935, an important cultural undertaking was instituted to document and to preserve an Afro-medicinal spiritual folklore and religious practices in America. This monumental task was instituted by the Alma Egan Hyatt Foundation of New York, under the auspices of an Episcopal priest by the name of Harry Middleton Hyatt from Quincy, Illinois. Mr. Hyatt traveled across the mainly southern United States, interviewing hundreds of ex-enslaved African American priestesses and priests and their descendants. He transcribed to Ediphones their folklore, folk medicine, and religious practices, many of whom, in spite of violent suppression and persecution, still practice remnants of the religious traditions of their ancient African ancestors. The more than 1,600 women and men practitioners interviewed by Mr. Hyatt, anxious to help document and preserve their important religious culture, volunteered to contribute to this historic archival study. What is interesting to note is that during the course of these interviews, nearly all of the women and an impressive number of the men declared with the strongest conviction that they were indeed true prophets, prophetess, and doctors. Commenting on this and the esoteric nature of Black folk cosmogony, Hyatt remarked, "What type of thought am I trying to bring above ground where it can be studied is a continuation of a mental phenomenon centuries old, the syncretism of magical rites, pseudoscience, and religion. We could call it an underground Gnosticism." That is so eloquently put, because that's exactly what our cosmogony is. It's not myth. It's not myth. It's the equivalent to Abrahamic religion's Gnostic practices, which is what I've been telling people on Threads. And I've actually had some really interesting discussions with people. But some people are so hell-bent on what they've been taught that they're not even open to information when it's in their face. And that's indoctrination. But there were plenty Gnostic sects of Christianity. That's why the Christianity that is practiced now is so, it's void of a lot of magic. Because they took the magic out of it. And our mothers were the only ones to preserve it. We could call it an underground Gnosticism. Gnostic, gnosis. I want to say gnosis. Gnostic, that means knowing, to know, to be certain, definite. Y'all, I done set off my damn alarm. Hold on. This room was painted, and so they took the smoke alarm down, and it was right here the whole time. I didn't even see it. So all that frankincense turned the damn alarm on. Okay, let's finish. Anyways, a great many of those interviewed claimed that they were prophets, prophetess, because the spirits called them, or because their mothers or fathers came from a blood lineage of two-headed people, or because they were simply born that way. It's in the blood. Now, one might say wrongly conclude upon first observation that since it was illegal for enslaved Africans to either read or write, such bold proclamations could only be due to their Christian conditioning. The only good thing, being Christianized, they were taught that resulted from some 150 years of chattel slavery and Jim Crow segregation. However, a closer examination might reveal that many in the diaspora may very well have been descendants of the Sybils, the first prophetess of Mami, the original goddess, whose history has been lost, stolen, deliberately culturally disguised, obscured and Europeanized beyond recognition in the contemporary faiths of today. We looking at it, but don't even realize what it is. However, with an increasing number of African Americans finding no solace in today's scandal-ridden, unfiling Western faiths, desire to learn the true history of their ancient ancestral religions that once dominated the world. Therefore, the time is nigh that their story be told. All right. Before there was Jehovah, a minor volcano, fire, thunder. That's what Jehovah means, by the way. A minor volcano, fire, thunder. Deity elevated as God under Afro-Ephraim Jewish patriarchy. There was Mami, Isis, as the preeminent dual goddess and god who dominated the entire ancient world. Wow, so I never knew that Jehovah was supposed to be the representation of the fire element. For more than 6,000 years, nearly all of Africa was matriarchal. The dominant presence of African matriarchy resulted not as a consequence of political feminist or military usurpation, but rather because it was the original and, more importantly, the natural divine order of the African civilized world. Its cosmology, philosophy, theology, ritual practices, and rich African culture empathize the complementary relationship between what has come to be known as the masculine and feminine divine, as it exists in both nature and within the universe. What passes for traditional African culture today, where women have been subdued and regulated to marginal roles in African political and religious life, is the result of the patriarchal usurpation of the older matriarchal orders, upon whom the patriarch sought to contain and to control her divine powers and political and economic influence. However, hidden beneath this patriarchal substratum of modern-day Africa, one will discover that it was under African matriarchy which birthed ancient African and Mediterranean culture and high civilization. I just want to say that ever since I was young, Mediterranean culture was always so interesting to me. Mediterranean culture and Hindu culture. And that is because the African matriarchy is what birthed all of those cultures. It birthed everything, really. So what they're saying in the text is basically that the patriarchal order that we see now is the flip of the matriarchal order that once ruled the entire world and was ruled by African women under the African matriarchy. Let's continue. The first prophets of Mami were African women. They were called Sybils, meaning that they were Mami Wata priestesses and priests of the Oannes. I don't know how to say that. Oannes. Their prophecies are the oldest in the world. It is through the divine blood of these Sybil priestesses that the patriarchal kingships of the pharaohs, the Hebrew prophets, and the Chaldean priests were born. It was the Sybil style of prophecy and magic that would later be imitated by a militant faction from these groups, who, envious of her global positioning, rebelled against these divine matriarchal orders and seized their temples and overthrew their priesthood as patriarchy began to dominate. In their jealousy, hatred, and rebellion of her divine authority, the Levitical Jews elevated their original minor deity, Jehovah, as an insult to her. Together, Jehovah and his patriarchal clan usurped her sacerdotal and secular power, and from that moment on, they have worn it as their own. They did not create a new logos. They simply corrupted and repackaged the original as laid forth by the divine African mother. It's the same logos. To conceal their crimes, they destroyed and defiled her name and all of her temples. They murdered and accused her prophetesses and prophets of heresy and witchcraft and disguised her sacred rites and divine legacy as their own. This trend of random destruction they continued so that the world would never again know or honor her as the divine African mother. This is basically the Salem witch trials, or the Crusades and the Inquisition prior to the Crusades and the Inquisition. Since their unauthorized acquisition of her divine authority, there has been little peace in the world, because they have demonized the voice of her prophetesses and continue to enslave and oppress her prophets and people. There has been no divine prophecy. All that remains are hopeless corruptions of her original logos and weak imitators such as Nostradamus of her divine prophetic style, the style originally developed by the Sybils and those of her sacred priesthoods. The Jews, whom after the 5th century BCE, for long could neither speak nor understand Hebrew, nor the ancient esoteric philosophy of Mami, attempted to decipher the original cuneiform tablets of the Black Canaanites that predate the Hebrew language. Their crude translations deliberately corrupted many of the ancient names of the Black goddesses and changed the original esoteric meanings of their prophecies to what exists now in the Torah and the Pentateuch. I don't know. How do you say that? I know pen means 5. Pentateuch. The 5 books. In Greek, the Pentateuch, which Jews call the Torah, includes the books of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. I've never heard it called that. How do you say it? Pentateuch. Okay. These now corrupted and worn scriptures or doctrines, mass-produced and distributed now in the Judeo-Christian Bible, have been the cause of untold human suffering, massive spiritual ignorance, spiritual suffering, and devastating wars. This was especially the case between those rebellious sons of the patriarchal it's just the way that Black women gather people up with their words. I'm sorry. Anyways, this was especially the case between those rebellious sons of the patriarchal Afro-Pharaonic orders who themselves were overthrown and robbed of their secular hegemony by their illegitimate offsprings, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. I'm trying to catch up with the chat. Okay. Though all latecomers into this very ancient and divine epic, their holy wars, claiming original ownership of the black goddess legacy, are centuries old, and are all that is allowed to remain within human memory. Ignorant of the original logos established by the divine African mother, their present struggles to maintain the corrupted version, which favors an exclusive, currently Euro-masculine, patriarchal predominance, are nothing more than a continuation of centuries-old battle over which patriarchal son should control and reign over the sacerdotal power stolen from her. The most coveted prize inherent within their secular authority are the spoils of her vast empire of land and mineral resources, replete with human, carefully programmed vassals to exploit. My goodness. This sacred empire, once bequeathed to the masses, is now controlled by those who have benefited from her suspicious absence from human worship as Mami, and the continual subjugation and degradation of the people who have known and have honored her sacred rites and religious customs for centuries, rooted in what are known today as African traditional and diaspora religions, ATRs. For many ATR practitioners, this revelation might come as shocking and unbelievable. You know what? We're going to highlight this. I wish I had some sticky notes. I gotta go get me some more stationery. Because this sounds like it's gonna speak to a lot of people, particularly women's experiences in these ATRs. And luckily, my spirit, I am so in tune that I was led into a space within an ATR and quickly removed. I mean quick. And by removed, I mean my actions were based off of what I was seeing, what was being presented to me in the astral realm. I wasn't looking for nothing. I didn't ask about anything. I just started having these really vivid, like a series of dreams. And I was so confused because if I was to follow these dreams, I would have to remove myself out of a space that I had just found. But it was necessary. For many ATR, African traditional religious practitioners, this revelation might come as shocking and unbelievable. The idea that African religious traditions, ritual practices, social customs, divine prophecy, and fundamental beliefs once dominated both the secular and non-secular world and laid the theological foundation for Judaism, Hinduism, Christianity, and Islam under the auspices of the Black matriarchs seems incredible. However, in order to understand what has just been written, it is necessary to start at some historic point in our human beginnings. Clearly, the first question begs, just who are the Sybils? And why have the world not learned of their Africanness and their primary and sacred role as the world's first prophetess, or their first major contribution to the divine history of world religions? By the way, I knew of the Sybils because I was a history nerd. I've always just loved history. And I had to be in like, I was either a freshman or a sophomore in high school. Maybe a sophomore. When Apple came out with the podcast application and they had all of these lectures on there. That's really what podcasts were at first. They were like informative platforms, almost like NPR kind of thing. And a lot of professors would get on there from these Ivy League schools and have like 2-3 hour lectures on history. And I kind of started listening to different things, and I remember learning about the Sybils. And I want to say I revisited the Sybils later on when I went off to take college classes. But it never occurred to me that they were black women, because that's missing in the text. That's missing in the historical depiction. They're drawn. Most of the images that you'll see are white women. African matriarchal principle of divine complementaries. These are some images. Glass Carthaginian mask amulet of black Mami deity Tanit, also known as the Libyan Liberia and Astarte. I can never say her name right, but I know she's an aspect of Mother Isis. Above, she is shown wearing a full beard to exemplify not her bisexuality, as is often misunderstood by Western interpreters, but rather her divine complementary nature of both feminine and masculine principles. In reality, the above is a modification of the divine 7 serpents, or the 7 African powers. Ciao. Okay. And thus a manifestation of Tanit as the premier oracle of the first ancestral masculine sun fire deity, Adama, who I believe is like Adamu, or Bacchus. The white cowling around her eyes and her cowrie-shaped mouth represents her ability to see and communicate in the world of spirit. This amulet was worn by Carthaginian soldiers to protect them from death during battles, and common folk to protect against the evil eye. Taken from Greek vase is a black Libyan whose worship was transported to Afro-Greece when the matriarchs fled the patriarchal takeover in ancient Egypt and Libya. She is seen sporting a beard representing not her bisexuality, but rather her totemic aspect as the ancestral black dove, or divine prophecy, or ancestral oracle for the thunder god Zeus. Zeus belongs to Mami. The oracle was Mami. Why were their prophecies stolen and corrupted, and their holy temples destroyed or converted into churches and mosques? Where African and later all women were no longer welcomed at the helm. Why was even the mention of the black goddess's name meant sure death, or practice of her sacred rites and rituals guaranteed social ostracism, persecution, and even death? The story of the Sybil's is long and complicated because it has been so badly disguised, corrupted, and carefully hidden by Western religious historians and the Catholic Church. However, some of it has been unearthed and is now being rewritten and recounted here in its near to original African perspective for the first time. Because the Sybil's are still being born in the ghettos of America, to the shanty villages of Africa, and because it is necessary to place African spirit within its ethnic and cultural milieu, the rightful place of African women must be restored. The place of African women as their first center of sacerdotal power is not political. She did not usurp her divine providence and authority from anyone. Her place is the manifestation of the original and natural order as willed through the divine logos, responsible for establishing human societies, moral law, religious institutions, and the sacred authority to maintain order on earth. It is hoped that in doing so, a new paradigm might be established in which the African people in the world might view that the patriarchal religious orders forced upon the world as the only divine paths to know their God. This is the new paradigm that comes out under the ages of Saturn, because we're in the age of Aquarius, which is going to last 2 years, and then we go backwards on the wheel. We're going to end up in the age of Capricorn, which is also ruled by Saturn. And Saturn is the the dark mother, the crone mother. She is the wise black woman. That's who she is. She's not that white man, that elderly white man. That's not Mother Saturn. Saturn is the crone mother. Saturn is Medea. Saturn is the auntie that gets ostracized from the family, but she's only ostracized because she keeps it a buck. Saturn is the big sister that's always in some sort of position of responsibility and authority. Saturn is the mother that loves you so much that she gonna tell you what you need to hear and not what you want to hear. That is Saturn. That's the age that we're in. The age of Aquarius is ushering in the return of the mothers. That's what's happening. The first Genesis, when the goddesses spoke through the African women. This is from an Etherean Sybil in 2800 BC. They will say that Sybil is mad and deceitful, but when all things shall come to pass, then ye will remember me, and no one will any longer say that I, the prophetess of the great goddess, am mad, aka what I'm seeing is what's about to happen. And if y'all were wise, you would take note. That's the majority of the people that follow me on here are very intuitive, and a lot of y'all are women. And the Sybils want us all to remember to trust our sight and our intuition. It's going to intimidate people, but you have to trust it. Because when you allow other people's feelings of you to dim your light or your gift, you do a disservice to all of humanity. Someplace in the beginning, the Sybils are descendants of the first Neolithic clans of African warrior queens, healers, prophets, prophetesses, and priests, priestesses who were on the first ship built by a goddess to establish the new world after the Great Flood. Patriarchal oral history only records there being men, namely Noah and his 3 racially different sons. However, this is mythical and not political and not historical. This is mythical and political and not historical. These 3 sons were all African, and there were African women, high priestesses called Sybil's, who issued forth the instructions from the divine African mother, Mami, as God, on how to build the Argos, or the Ark, in the giving forth of the prophecy pertaining to the end of their world, and they knew it as they knew it in ancient Babylon. So basically, the oracles got a hit that destruction was coming in the form of a great flood. Mommy always communicates with water. I've been having so many water dreams since 2019. And it took me a while to figure out why. Because I was really attributing it to specific energies like Oya, Yemaya, Oshun, Olokun, actually, that's a whole nother thing because I had a visitation. But what I'm getting at is Mommy is all of those energies. So they got the oracle, which gave them the orders to leave Libya because the flood was coming, which is why the ark was built, so that they could save civilization. Oral tradition also has it that when men revolted against the authority of Mami, they separated themselves from the divine African mother. Ooh. Basically, if a man does not know God, the goddess, the great mother, they'll find themselves without her instruction and her protection. In one Afro-Chaldean, Reiki, ancient Babylonian account, Mami is worshipped as the goddess, Aruru Ishtar. Ishtar, meaning queen or lady, is not a proper name, but rather one of her oldest appellations. Mami, or Mami, is how some people say it, is a holy honorific title denoting great reverence, attributed to any African goddess, particularly of the waters. As the Afro-Chaldean account goes, Ishtar, in her inconsolable grief, angered at their rebellion and betrayal of her, prophesies through one of her Sybils the following fate that would befall her beloved African people. Spake Ishtar, like a child uttered, the great goddess her speech. All to corruption are turned, and then I, in the presence of the gods, prophesied, and as I prophesied in the presence of the gods evil, to evil were devoted all my people. And I prophesied, I, the mother, have begotten my people, and like the young of the fishes, they filled the sea. The gods concerning the spirits were weeping with me. The gods in seats, seated in lamentation, covered with their lips for the coming evil. As promised, for their great apostasy against her laws, she retaliated and inundated their world or nation as they knew it, with a great and mighty flood. However, before doing so, she gathered her devoted and preserved her sacred seed inside the blood of the Sybil's, under whose divine guidance she led them and their families along with the great elder and his sons in the new world. The elder's name is Iowa, also known as Noah. It was in her sacred Argos, or moon crescent boat, that she guided them across the great dark mysterious sea to the Aegean shores of Delos and Ionia. 6 days and nights passed. The wind, the deluge, storm overwhelmed. On the seventh day, in its course, which calmed the storm and all the deluge which had destroyed everything like an earthquake, quieted. On the seventh day, in the course of it, I sent forth a dove, and it left. I sent the animals forth to the winds. This is the story that is attributed to Noah. Those doves that were sent forth were the black doves, or the transmigrated souls of the Sybil's, whose priesthoods were already well known and long established in ancient Ethiopia, Egypt, Mesopotamia, and other ancient lands that were spared from the great flood. We know this to be so because Herodotus, who actually met one of the temple Sybil priestesses, further recounts the story directly told to him of how they arrived in their new land and established the sacred Amphi temples in Libya and at Dodona, Delphi, and Delos of the Grecian islands. He writes that at Dodona, the priestesses who delivered the oracles have a story. 2 black doves flew away from Thebes in Egypt, and one of them alighted at Dodona, and another in Libya. The former perched on an oak, and speaking with a human voice, told them there, on that very spot, should be an oracle of Zeus, or Horus. By the way, Horus derives from, the word Horus is tied to the word whore, or rather the word whore is tied to the word Horus, which is tied to the word harlot, which is tied to the concept of holy harlots. The women of the hour, because women measure time. It is the existence of women that allows us to measure time here, because women tie us to the earth, because they are direct descendants of the earth. Those who heard her understood the words to be a command from heaven, and at once obeyed. The dove which flew to Libya told the Libyans to found the oracle of Ammon, located at the oasis at Siwa, which is also an oracle of the thunder god Zeus. Okay. The people who gave me this information were the 3 priestesses at Dodona, Promenea, the eldest, Timarete the next, and Nicandra the youngest. And their account is confirmed by the Dodonians who have any connection with the temple. Okay, I gotta take a drink. Other accounts differ on how they arrived in Dodona. It is said that they were in such high demand throughout the ancient world that they were often stolen from Africa, sold as slaves by their Afro-Phoenicians, Carthaginians, and forced to establish their ancestral and totemic oracles. On this Herodotus concludes, I think that if that be true, that the Phoenicians carried off the holy women and sold them for slaves, afterwards, while undergoing servitude in those parts, she built under a real oak a temple. Then, having acquired a knowledge of the Greek tongue, she set up an oracle. She also mentioned that her sister had been sold for a slave into Libya by the same persons as herself. The Dodonaeans called the women doves because they were foreigners and seemed to them to make a noise like birds. Oh my gosh, hold on. Because when reading the Old Testament, particularly I've been working on something dealing with King Solomon. So I'm reading Kings, and I can't remember the other book that I kept having to reference. But I'm going through the text, and every time I see the word foreign women, I know they're referring to women who were still tied to their old customs. They were still tied to idol worship, which is, those who know it's not idol worship. They were still praying to their pots and their statues of the goddesses. So these women, because the Levitical Jews usurped the temples in Libya, in that whole region that they had established that went all the way to Turkey, they took over the temples and they took over the trade route. And instead of just trading goods, they started trading people. They started trading the priestesses and the priests. Some accounts say that they were sold into slavery, meaning it was a clever way to move them off the land so that they could take over that region, so that the pharaohs could eventually rise up. Others say that these women were in such high demand that they went to take on a vow of servitude in these temples. I think these women were forced to choose between shit and mud. And the best option was to serve in these temples, because the temple would offer some sort of protection, more protection than they would have out in the streets or even in a marriage at that time, because things were so chaotic. Everything about society had been flipped. Women weren't safe in the streets without protection. But these women were so smart and had the foresight and followed their intuition and followed the instruction of Mami, that as they were being sold, they established oracles in different places. As they learned the tongue, as they learned the native tongue, they started being able to serve the community once they picked up the language. But to everybody else, they sounded foreign because they weren't from there, so they called them doves, black doves, which we see in Christian symbology, but it is now the white dove. Okay, so let me finish. What time is it? 2:14. All right. After a while, the dove spoke with a human voice. By calling the dove black, the Dodonaeans indicated that the woman was an Egyptian. And certainly, the character of the oracles at Thebes and Dodona is very similar. It seems to me a sufficient proof that in Egypt these practices have been established from remote antiquity, while in Greece they are only recently known. Quoting archaeologist Kweeni when presenting his findings to the Archaeological Institute of America, Kweeni states that I maintain that the historical accounts, myths, and legends, and some monuments of Delphi indicate that the oracle was established there by the pharaohs of the Ethiopian dynasty. This is the reasons why the Greeks portrayed Delphos, the eponymous hero of Delphi, as a Negro. These written accounts are the only written records available documenting the historical existence of the Sybil's and their prophetic oracles. These historical accounts also establish their existence centuries after their arrival in the new lands, after their temples had already been seized and renamed Zeus and Apollo by the pharaonic sun thunder temple priest of Ammon. So, wait a minute, hold up. They just said the dove which flew to Libya told the Libyans to found the oracle of Ammon, which is also an oracle of Zeus. Oh, there's more to this, because how did the oracle betray the instruction? More will be provided on this later. What is more important here is that the first thing the Sybil's in Iowa or Noah did was to construct an Amphi, a temple or shrine, and make sacrifices to Mami. They installed and consecrated the sacred Amphi shrines to Mami and their minor gods. This they did in Libya and at Delos, Delphi, and Dodona. Afterwards, some of these groups settled into Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey, and installed a shrine to Mami, never having broken their ancestral ties with Kemet, Egypt, Nubia, Libya, Syria, Palestine. They soon developed a sophisticated trade and prospered into what would later become known as the Great Minoan and Mycenaean matriarchal civilizations. So they established, this is talking about, I want to say the Mitanni Empire era. They preserved their history in poetic and prophetic prose that would later be used as the basis for Greek and Roman tragedies and plays. They would lay the ecclesiastical foundation for the collection of apocryphal books, later to be modified as the Christian Bible. During ancient times, leaders customarily applied allegory and poetic rhyme to conceal as well as to commit to heart esoteric truths that were not meant for the masses. The priestesshood of the Sybil's were even more conspicuous. They were part of the divine cycle of procreation, preservation, death, and renewal, which was believed to take place every 6,000 years. The above allegorical story of their arrival upon an ark with Noah and his 3 sons after surviving the great flood destruction is simply representative of this divine cycle. Yeah, because they get there on their ark with Noah and their 3 sons, which is the bloodline that they were trying to preserve, and they survived the destruction of the great flood, which is a representation of procreation, preservation, and death and renewal. Another example would be that of the 9 muses, or masculine Moses, originating out of ancient Egypt. They were the feminine counterpart to the Messiah/Savior. Each one represented a Sybil as the divine incarnation of the 9 cycles, or Watas, or rays, divine saviors who had already manifested as the new Messiah of healing and prophecy, and to announce the coming end of a divine cycle. In short, the Muses, or Sybil's, were literally the light of divine wisdom, or the divine spark of the divine African mother as Mami. They were symbolically the divine rays of truth emanating from the crowns of the masculine sun thunder gods. During times of preservation, each muse offered the gift of their specific talents: music, art, science, and literature. However, during periods of cyclic renewal, one would manifest from among them, Sybil's, to become the prophetic voice of the divine African mother, Mami. I see. So there were many Sybil's, of course, and they all preserved and shared their gift. However, different Sybil's would have the divine authority to share prophecy directly from the divine African mother. Origin of the name Sybil. The name Sybil is of mixed origins. It is the sacred initiatory title that the ancient Africans called the prophetess or priestesses of the Mami Watas. According to some, it is derived from the black Ethiopian Cushites known as the Phrygians, or Phrygians, natives of Mycenae. Their name of endearment for Mami was Sybil, or Sibella, Queen of Heaven, Mother of the Gods. Some scholars believe that Sybil is a Greek corruption of 2 words. Sio, meaning God, and Bule, meaning to counsel. Both words are derived from their Afro-Aeolitic dialect of ancient Mycenae. Combined, it reads as Sibule, which phonetically evolved into the English Sybil, which sounds a lot like Sybil. Additionally, Webster's dictionary defines a Sybil as a female prophet or a woman able to utter the oracles and prophecies of a god, or a woman who can foretell the future. Conversely, under the bitter Hebrew patriarchs, the Sybil's are condemned in their Bible as Mahaleth-O, meaning evil serpent spirit or mistress of the python. However, when all is said and done, the Sybil's refer to themselves as the sisters of Isis and sometimes prophetesses of the Black Diana. The Holy Sublime Oracles. This is what I was telling y'all that I was listening to the other night. The Sublime Oracles are a series of divine prophecies given over a span of more than 3,000 years that contain accurate global predictions and chronicle the rise and fall of great empires and the destinies and fates of important heads of states, village kingdoms, their leaders, and their nations. These cycles usually entailed prophesying the coming of a Holy One. This Holy One was not an apocalyptic savior sent to save all humankind, but rather the usual savior, sun thunder deities whose life was offered as a human sacrifice to purify the negative accumulation of karma and announce the new groom of the Divine Mother. The idea of a soul savior probably began with the killing of the first Anuki, or fish deity, sent to liberate and redirect the dangerously aggressive masculine tendencies of the patriarchal rebellions, always threatening to destabilize the natural, social, and political order of matriarchal society. Usually, the traditional target of their masculine aggression was aimed at overthrowing the divine matriarchies and their much coveted political and economic position established by the goddess, which they maintained as the central seat of sacerdotal and secular power in the world. The necessary cycles of human destruction and rebuilding or regeneration traditionally entail the customary sacrificial, death, and resurrection ceremonies. The ritual purgations, purifications, corrections of personal and societal errors, in violation of taboos, and the relief and justice for the suffering masses. These Sybil's prophetic utterances were written down by scribe priests and priestesses, many compiled in each individual amphe and temple shrine across the world. For example, during the coming of one future cycle, it was Plato who later revealed the secret that at Delphi there was an ancient secret prophecy concerning the birth of a son of Apollo, who was to be the one to restore the reign of justice and virtue on earth. Godfrey Higgins claims that these Sybil prophecies were actually referring to either the Black Buddha or the Black Krishna, both who were actually born on the holy Grecian island of Dodona. Remember, Dodona is where they fled. There's a lot of people practicing Buddhism and they have no idea of the origin of that particular philosophy. At Delphi, it was Sybil, later known as Themis or Artemis, Black Diana. These Sybils, when seized by the spirit, would fall into possession, causing them to thrash about the ground, uttering messages from the gods. More often, it was a divine ancestor expressing his or her unhappiness with those who were in violation of divine law. And that happens in mediumship, period. Sometimes, if you grew up in the church, it looks like somebody catching the spirit and they just start thrashing about. Or if you go to a drumming or a ceremony and you see somebody get mounted, it's all the same thing. It's all the same thing. Thrash about the ground, uttering messages from the gods. That's them ancestors coming through to tell you, we see what you're doing and we're not pleased. We're not pleased. That's all that is. She'd utter warnings and admonitions to the villages, cities, and ancient kingdoms and their leaders, prophesying their doom or fulfilling their hopes and restoring lost glory. She'd right moral wrongs and punish offenders of the divine law. She'd heal the sick, call up the dead, and restore dignity and strength to the weak. The prophecies were consistent and similar with those uttered by the chief Sybil priestesses of the major amphe shrines, scattered all across the ancient Mediterranean world. After realizing their intrinsic value, it was these prophecies that were later competitively seized and collated by the Roman Poples and Levitical Jews during their religio-political wars, the Holy Wars. They complied, doctored, and plagiarized by them. That's a typo. They were compiled, doctored, and plagiarized by them as they exist today in what has become known as the Sublime Oracles. So the origin of the Christian faith as we know it today, derives from, what's the word? A mangled compilation of sacred books that were stolen from the Sybils or the prophetesses. The sacerdotal matriarch of the Sybils. By 11th century, Turkish monk and world historian Sidrinus claimed that the Queen of Sheba was a Sybil. Prior to Egypt's dynastic period, the civil and religious culture of these matriarchal Sybs flourished in the Mediterranean world for more than 6,000 years. For centuries, the Grecian islands of Delos, Dodona, Delphi, and the Temple of Mami in Libya were the ecclesiastical and moral hub of religious, social, and international political activity. As the first established sacerdotal African matriarchs, the Sybils' cultural and religious impact was arguably the most profound on ancient civilization than history has ever revealed or cared to admit. From Mesopotamia to Libya, Kemet, Egypt, Ionia, Manoa, Peloponnese, Mycenae, and later Rome, the Sybils were the primary divine Vatican and absolute moral authority. Remember, in the first reading, we defined the word Vatican. Her worship as the manifestation, let me back up. Just as their divine African mother, Mami Isis, served as the first universal sacerdotal symbol of the divine celestial and terrestrial African ancestress. Her worship as the manifestation of the Logos was continued in Asia Minor, Cushitic, Mitanni Empire, and in Manoa and the Mycenae, Aegean Islands. Archaeological pottery shards date the black descendants of the Libyan, Garamantes, present-day Iwe, Adongbe, and other African clans who had settled into Babylon and elsewhere before the flood to have arrived in Manoa as early as 4000 BCE, meaning that the groups that are now in West Africa are the descendants of those who fled Libya at the time of the Great Flood. And also they were fleeing because that whole region had been usurped. All of the temples in the government was taken over. So they had to leave. In Manoa and Mycenae, later named Greece, it was under the theocratic governance of the Sybils as queen mothers that African matriarchal culture reached its golden age of achievement in medicine, religion, astronomy, philosophy, law, architecture, music, art, and social sophistication. Under this same matriarchal sacerdotal order, as an era of high diplomacy, mutual cooperation and peace ensured. The Sybils clans were further divided into Sybs, similar to extended family villages. The Sybs, as Sybs, they were the queen mothers and priestesses of their individual family totems and ancestral deities. Sybs are an extension of the prehistoric African matriarchal custom of usually 3 major matrilineal clans joining their tutelary and ancestral deities together, forming loose confederations amounting to one clan unit. Individuals initiated into the mysteries were reborn as a Sybil or a Pythias, the same way that they are reborn as Mamisi or Amagasi, or in the Mami Wata Vodun within their respective Sybil. Iwe Fran, okay. However, within the tradition, they may be simply addressed as Ma, Nana, or Mama. Together, they constructed massive temples dedicated to Mami and all of her offspring deities whose authoritative influence and divine power extended to all four corners of the known world. It was in those sacred temples that the Sybils would offer their divine wisdom, healing, and prophetic counsel. As avatars, muses, vestals, and saints of the Mami Watas, all divine power later attributed to the most highest male god and prophets was first accomplished by the priestesshoods headed by these holy African queen mothers. All nations, even up until the Roman period, depended on the prophecy, advice, and divine knowledge of these African priestesses uttering the words of their African deities. The powerful confederations of city-states collectively known as the Minoan and Mycenaean culture consisted of Ionia, Libyan Crete, also known as Keftiu, or Keftu, that's Keftiu, by Egyptians, Argos, Arcadia, Ephesus, Cythera, Corinth, Thessaly, Samothrace, Lydia, Lesbos, Vigeria, I'm murdering these words, Mysia, Lycia, Rhodes, Peloponnese, now Turkey, and many others. It was there where Black matriarchy reigned supreme under the watchful guidance of the divine African mothers who were defended by an Amazonian garrison. I said something about the Amazons on the internet, where I was basically just thinking, per usual, and I was like, the story of David and Goliath, I wonder who Goliath really was. I wonder if there is a more ancient telling of that story that I'm not familiar with. I haven't done the research on it yet. But I was wondering, wouldn't it be interesting if that was actually a story about the Amazons that came into that region? And was this story, were we being told another lie, basically? Were we being told that it was men, these giant men that came into this region? Or were they Amazons? Because Amazons were all over the ancient world, because they were being sent out to colonize newer civilizations, to bring a renaissance to newer civilizations across the world. The last place they reached were the Americas. All right, so these sites were spiritually and culturally enriched havens where commerce, poetry, music, theater, architecture, philosophy, and astronomy flourished. An ancient region later invaded and inhabited by the Greeks, Persians, and Turks, who arrived some 2,500 years later, would be exclusively credited with developing these civilizations. However, both Briffault and Herodotus asserts their African matriarchal roots and tells us that the earliest temples of Delphi was a thatched hut, In Lydia, the dwelling houses were mostly built of reed and mud. There can be little doubt that, like the African kraals which they resembled, they were built by African women. Diner further informs us that as these ancient black matriarchies began to prosper, they built grand civilizations that became the envy of the known world. We are told that the girls and boys went to school together and learned geometry, grammar, and even square roots, and that anyone operating a business had to keep books. Diner further reports that the capital of Lydia became the Paris of Asia Minor, greater than Greece. One imported the most elegant of cloth, perfumes, and the fine high-heeled shoes so much in demand in Sappho's circles or poetry circles. It was also a male beauty center featuring such attractions as permanents, gold jewelry, manicuring, and dental cures. And whoever thought that the Chaldean Reiki diviners were too expensive has his horoscope prepared by the Lycinian ladies. So basically, the ladies were checking the work of the Chaldean priest, which is similar to today. You can still go to a Babalawo, but a lot of people will go to an Amagasi to confirm what the Babalawo has said if they have suspicions about what the Babalawo told them. In Asia Minor, now Turkey, the science of medicine had its origins in the first great temple to the African ancestral python, Asclepius, was built. Moreover, it was these black matriarchal islands that Hippocrates learned to conduct the first scientific investigations of anatomy and disease. Later, the sons of Rome flocked to learn medicine at her schools, and distinguished African physicians tended to their emperors, consuls, and military commanders. This is what they talk about when they say this region was known for their mystery schools, their medicine schools. It attracted the invaders. We further learn that the languages of both Greek and Latin, as well as their tonal musical scales, are derived directly from the Afro-Phoenician, Aeolian, and Phrygian dialects of these African and Elamite matriarchal groups. The pre-Grecian island of Rhodes, named after its original black inhabitants, was originally known as Pelasgia, meaning sailors, or the daughters of the sea. They were said to have furnished literature and history with inexhaustible material and rendered invaluable services to the fine arts and exact science and applied mechanics. A code of maritime legislation was formulated, which has formed the basis of all subsequent studies of the subject. Jesus, that was a lot of S's. Daughters of the sea. Pelasgia. And I have to research them. However, although Rhodes was said to have maintained 100 images of the sun god Apollo and one to Mami, whom they knew as Lokun, with her serpents, it was the Grecian island of Delos that housed the Vatican of the African goddess and her consort gods. Hailed as one of the 7 wonders of the world, these sacred temples were maintained by the Sybils and a contingent of Vestal virgin priestesses and eunuchs. These African deities never walked in the flesh. For more than 1,000 years, the sacred island was free from war, crime, and invasions. Thus, borders were never necessary. Here is where Artemis, later the Black Diana, was said to have been born next to the sacred lake, along with Isis, Anubis, and Serpes. More divinities were added as the African and Elamite or Tamil populations increased. The place was covered with holy temples and colossal marble statues of the deities. There were clubs, markets, and palaces. White robe processions in honor of some deity were always in session. According to Horton, they maintained a system of bartering in goods, and their trade routes to Palestine, Egypt, Libya, Athens, Corinth, Crete, Turkey, and others enumerated a list of which would make a poem. Horton further tells us that one came to Delos as a pilgrim and merchant. The place swarmed with bantering humanity. Commerce and religion were interfused or connected like Siamese twins. If one died, the other gave up the ghost. Their temples were deemed so holy that one could only live but never be born, die, or buried on the island. Wow. Sacrifices were also forbidden. Any sacrifices had to be performed on the neighboring islands. If either birth or death was imminent, one was transported to another island. All right, this is going to be the last page. Later, when the patriarchal Persians, Aryans, or Iranians had their turn at invading, pillaging, and destroying all of the other island temples and slaughtering its inhabitants when they arrived at Delos, they were so in awe that they left it untouched. We are further told that these African and Elamite patriarchal confederations would come together at the main oracular temple in Ephesus, built by their Amazons, to worship the Queen of Heaven, who was known in their own tongue by many names. The most popular being Artemis, Sybil, Ceres, Demeter, Demeter, Artigatus, and Dione. And just as the Helen of Troy, they too were all black. It was at the Ionian island of Cythera where Black Aphrodite first rode upon the foam of a great wave and demanded that a temple be built to her. Soon, many more gods would follow. The African gods heading these divine pantheons, Isis, Inanna, Ashtoreth, Atargatis, Sybil, Demeter, Hathor, Black Diana, were the major water deities who were known by many names in the theology of the Mami Wata tradition. They all belong to Mami. They are descended from the original Logos, which is known in Kemet, Egypt as Isis. Isis is a divine concept which embodies this Logos as divine wisdom. As the first African and ancestress, she is also recognized as the first divine queen, possessed of the full power of Mami. She herself was not God, but rather its divine wisdom, first divine crowned manifestation in human form, whose rites are known as Mami Wata. Her name, just as that of Osiris and Horus, became synonymous with the Negeter, and the names Isis, Sybil, Mamisi, and others are particularly commensurate with one initiated as serpent water priestess. Ooh, this is gonna be fun. Okay, that's where I'm gonna have to stop. When I come back, we're gonna pick up on the Black Amazons in defense of mother rights. This is going to talk about the origin of the Black Amazons that I was talking about online on Threads. If you're not following me, go ahead and follow me if you are interested in this type of stuff. So that's all I really talk about on there. I have a ritual coming up on the 15th. If you care to have me do it, you can sign up, or you can participate in your own ritual at home. This ritual is for the mothers. Me personally, I'm going to be making the offerings to the Iami. But some of you, if you're working with your ancestors, this year in particular is a really good year to venerate your maternal lineage and your mothers, period. Just your mothers in general. So when you're doing your offerings and you're sending your prayers, send a little bit of extra love and attention to your mothers, because they are returning, and the people that I have been speaking to have been dreaming of a storm. They've been having a lot of miraculous things occur, a lot of weird paranormal things happening, and I laugh every time because it's always got something to do with the mothers, the mother lineage, grandmothers, aunts, sisters, women in general. So yeah, if you'd like to sign up for that, it's going to be July 15th. Divination is not necessary for this particular ritual. And yeah, I'm going to go before I lose my voice. I will see y'all in the next one. Bye-bye.